Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we are discussing life after the Great Crusade. Which Primarchs had a role in the Emperor's future? And what roles could they possibly have done? Well, there's only one way to do this, and that's to go through each Primarch and Legion one by one. Obviously, I will be mentioning events from across the lore for this one, so just keep that in mind as we jump straight in. And I will say, before we go any further, it wouldn't have surprised me in the slightest if the Emperor fully planned to dispose of all the legions and the Primarchs at the end of the Great Crusade originally, much like the Thunder Warriors before them. We'll never know for sure, but hey, it's certainly possible. However, whatever the Emperor's original intent was regarding the Primarchs, I think the moment his humanity became attached to them, he began feeling and viewing them as his sons, well then everything changed. And I really think he most definitely would have wanted to keep them all around somehow. There's definitely a reference to the Primarch's future retirement somewhere in the Heresy series that I can remember. I just can't quite remember where it was off the top of my head. But anyway, let's make our way through in Legion order, with number 1, the first, Lion L. Johnson. Now, L. Johnson, for all the mystery he was in the old lore, became a Primarch whose loyalty to the Emperor was beyond question throughout the Heresy series. A Primarch the Emperor appeared to trust even over the likes of Guilliman. So he's definitely a Primarch I could never envisage the Emperor removing, shall we say. The problem is, what other kind of role could he perform within the Imperium? And for me, I'm just not too sure he's suited to one. For some reason, I get a strong kind of judge or justice vibe from him, perhaps becoming involved in the Imperium in some kind of judicial manner. However, I admit that's probably arising from him heading to Ultramar to judge Rabute, and not a lot else. But I could definitely see those kind of vibes with him. The problem for me, however, is his no-nonsense militaristic attitude. The wildness of the hunter forged on Caliban. That's a part of the lion I just don't see him being able to tame, to eradicate. He's one of the Primarchs who would hate a galaxy of peace, needing that war, that quarry to pursue. So for me, L. Johnson would most likely have to remain with his Legion, probably patrolling the far-flung borders of the galaxy, repelling any enemies that emerge from the void, putting down any uprisings of Chaos or Xeno. He'd be in his element when the Tyranids arrive, that's for sure. I mean, heck, L. Johnson would be a great choice to lead the war within the warp, within the webway, if the Emperor intended those next. And you have to think there would be some form of that ahead. But yeah, for me, L. Johnson needs that foe to pursue. Peace does most definitely not suit him. Moving on, next we have Fulgrim. Now, of all the Primarchs who could excel once the galaxy was conquered, Fulgrim could be number 1. There are few, if any, Primarchs who can rival the Phoenician as a statesman, as a diplomat or speaker. For me, he represents the perfect blend of Sanguinius and Guilliman combined together. And I actually think that's exactly what Fulgrim was designed for. To be a symbol of the Emperor. To be his voice when the Emperor was needed elsewhere. I mean, he certainly lives up to the billing. Physically perfect, beautiful, regal, a spectacle in his own right, able to inspire with just his words, So I mean, what other role could Fulgrim be so perfectly suited for? He and the Emperor's children would definitely make the perfect heralds of the Emperor. The symbol of his office, travelling around the Imperium, the galaxy. And that's not necessarily as unimportant as it sounds. There would be a beyond vast amount of requirements for the Emperor's presence across the Imperium. It's the entire galaxy conquered after all. No different than any other ruler throughout history. And again, Fulgrim would fit that bill perfectly. As long as he didn't let it all go to his head, of course. Now, Perturabo, he is an intriguing one. Obviously, with his legion taking on garrison duty throughout the Crusade, you could easily expect more of the same in that regard. And most likely that is what would be needed of the Iron Warriors. But the problem is that resentment that had become embedded within Perturabo. The grudge he allowed to fester. I have no doubt the presence of the Emperor could remove that from within him. But still, it makes it a difficult dilemma. On a personal footing, Perturabo seems far happier studying and building, researching the mysteries of the galaxy, like when he made the device for his brother Magnus. So having Perturabo heading up a science or research division within the Imperium could also work too. In fact, it would most likely be the best role for the Hammer of Olympia. Making him feel needed, enjoying his work, valued. But him performing that kind of role is a lot of speculation on my part, and I'm just not sure that is where he would in fact end up. He is undoubtedly a tricky one to nail down, I guess. Two different aspects of his personality. The reality of the situation compared to the ideal of what he could be. I'd definitely be interested to see what you think about Perturabo after the Crusade here. But again, for me, I'm torn between simple garrison duty and the more researching, scientific aspect of his personality. Now, next we have Jaghatai Khan. As much as I love Jaghatai, I have to admit it's difficult to see where he fits in the Imperium's future. Created to be the wild card, the unknown factor, he notoriously had a hard time getting along with his father, disagreeing entirely with the Imperial truth, preferring to be out away from the growing Imperium, on some far-flung reach of the galaxy. Quite simply, Jaghatai doesn't feel like he fits an Imperium of peace, and nor does he feel like he was made to. It's very ironic. He, of all the Primarchs who could have turned against the Emperor, remained faithful. Prior to the Emperor becoming attached to the Primarchs as sons, you could see Jaghatai being one who simply doesn't fit the future, being removed when the time came. However, given the Emperor did become attached to the Primarchs as sons, even the ones he didn't necessarily get along with the most, I see Jaghatai pretty similar to L. Johnson, needing that quarry, that prey, the freedom, patrolling the void or taking part in a possible war within the warp, the quest to kill chaos for good. It would have to be something like that, because I just can't see him content any other way. On to Leman Russ. Okay, now with the Executioner role, I've always kind of viewed Russ and his legion as the inter-legion police force, if you will. The one there to keep the others in line. And I guess that's a role that, for as long as there's Primarchs and legions, there will always need to be a counter against them. And so Russ could well continue on in that role. In fact, he most likely would. There was a particular scene in the immediate aftermath of the heresy where Russ was visited by the Emperor within his dream, whereupon the Emperor essentially told Russ, "No, your job is not to defend me, but to defend the Imperium." And though that was obviously done in the wake of the heresy, and in all likelihood was just a dream of Russ's mind, it does kind of reveal Russ's purpose. Straight up warrior. He doesn't quite have the adaptability and other assets that some of his brothers do. To adapt to a post-Crusade Imperium, he'd become incredibly bored incredibly quickly. And so Russ absolutely would have to remain at the head of his legion, ready and preparing for war, defending the Imperium from the threats without, and the threats within. There's just no other option for the Wolf King. Next we have Rogel Dawn. Now, as much as Rogel's nature is your prototypical no-nonsense military commander, we saw firsthand within the Heresy series how valued his talent at building truly was. And you have to think, if the Great Crusade had been successful, with Rogel having been withdrawn to the throne world by the Emperor's side, fortifying it to the thing of beauty it was, prior to Horus's betrayal, well then surely that would be a role that would be required across the Imperium. Bastions and fortifications across the Imperium needing to be elevated to the glory of a galaxy conquered. So not just the throne world representing the Emperor, representing mankind's glory at its pinnacle, but all the Imperium, especially necessary if a webway network had been established like the Emperor wished to. The focal points of these gateways would need to be able to be defended from each way, an attack from without, and the possibility of from within, the portal itself. So while it may not sound like much, preparing the galaxy to that needed standard, it would absolutely be a monumental undertaking, and surely given his selection as Praetorian, it would fall to Rogel and his sons to achieve it. Moving on to Konrad Curze. Oh boy, it's very hard to see where Konrad fits here. By the time of Horus's fall, he was already well on his way to insanity. His legion most definitely a lost cause. Would or could the Emperor spend the time with him to fix him, for want of a better expression? I don't know. I've no doubt the Emperor would want to help Konrad deal with his visions and foresight. But the Emperor's humanity was never quite his strength, so I'm not sure he'd be able to prioritise the urgency and time that Konrad needed from him specifically, especially considering the end of the Great Crusade is hardly the end of the Emperor's ambition, his goal for humanity. So Konrad could well be a Primarch who doesn't have a place within the Imperium's future. I definitely think if the Emperor helped Konrad get back to the Primarch he was meant to be, well then he's the perfect fear and threat needed across the Empire. Because we've seen, even within the Emperor's golden vision, fear is necessary sometimes. Perhaps even Konrad and the Night Lords would be used and retained the way they are. I mean, let's be honest, it wouldn't be the strangest decision the Emperor's ever made. But with the extremes and excesses Konrad was being led to, I just find that one hard to accept. I just can't see the Night Lords as they became in the Imperium's golden future. So for me, the Night Lord's Legion could be the first one here, with a very real threat of being removed. Wiped out. And Konrad, while I doubt he'd be willingly killed by the Emperor, It wouldn't surprise me if he ended up being the Primarch's dark little secret, locked away in some specially created high-security, insane asylum, buried deep beneath the Imperial Palace, probably only visited once in a while by the Angel Sanguinius. It's tough, as this one's very dependent on what the Emperor may do, which of course we can't possibly know. But at the end of the day, I just don't think it looks good for the Night Haunter. And speaking of the Angel Sanguinius, our last Primarch for Part 1, the Angel himself. Well, if one thing's for sure, the Blood Angels Legion should be able to adapt to a more peaceful Imperium, thanks to their very artistic nature. The works of art the Sons of Sanguinius produce is unparalleled across the Imperium in many regards. They could be artists, architects, craftsmen, tutors, and instructors across the galaxy, their works adorning the worlds of the Imperium, lifting humanity up in its inspiration. However, the flaw within does raise some very intriguing problems for the Blood Angels' future, and a question does remain on if the Emperor would allow them to continue after the Crusade is won. If he intentionally engineered the flaw within them, which we believe he did, then they were surely only created for war. But of course there's no way Sanguinius would stand for the execution of his legion, even against his father. So it would be an interesting situation to say the least. As for the Angel himself, you can't help but see him having to fulfill a role similar to Fulgrim. The Angel is often mentioned by the Primarchs to be the most like their father, and inescapably for him, his wings make him even more of a symbol. And so surely Sanguinius would have to fulfill some form of dignitary role, being the presence of the Emperor when the Emperor couldn't personally be there himself. He might not quite be the diplomat or statesman that Fulgrim is, but the Angel is undoubtedly even more of a symbol, even more impressive for mortals to see. But it is worth remembering too that Horus would still be around here, and most likely retaining the title of War Master. So I'm not sure we would see Sanguinius anointed in any way, being elevated over his brothers, despite the Emperor's fondness for him. However, he absolutely would have to perform some form of important ambassador role. I am absolutely certain about that one. The presence and impact of him is too great not to. Now, I'm not saying he'd be happy doing that, nor am I saying that for any of the Primarchs for that matter. But again, the original plan may well have been to only have the Primarchs and Legions for the Great Crusade. And then, much like the Thunder Warriors, their purpose was fulfilled. We'll never know for sure, but I just think the Emperor as he came to be would not want to remove the Primarchs. For all his flaws, we saw he did come to care about them as his sons. However, that's it for part 1. Drop your thoughts in the comments below as usual, and we'll continue with the rest of the Primarchs in part 2. As always everyone, huge thank you to all my subscribers for your support. It truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed that particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.